This set of stats relates to the actual cost of capital estimation. So let's review this overall picture. Remember that value comes from discounting free cash flows at a discount rate. That discount rate happens to be, in our case, the weighted average cost of capital. As we had said, the discount rate needs to reflect the opportunity cost of your funds. If your funds are being paid out to all providers of funds, equity holders and creditors, then the discount rate has to reflect some sort of weighted average of the cost of those funds that come from those two sources. So all of this conversation relates to, as you see in the arrow, the denominator component of value. Now, why is it so important to adequately estimate your cost of capital? Because it has a very important impact on value. As we have seen in the previous slide, let me just show you. Value is a function of basically two things, right? There's a numerator and a denominator. So a correct estimation of that denominator of your cost of capital will have an impact on how you value your opportunities or how you value your company. Okay. And if you do this incorrectly, then you may end up rejecting projects that should be accepted or accepting projects that should be rejected because you are either underestimating or overestimating value. Okay. If you are working within a corporate environment, then you must also, I guess, this maybe bring back memories for some of you, right, of how you have to submit certain investment projects to the finance division of your company, and many times, though the proposal may increase productivity or may increase or may decrease certain costs, many times you see that the proposal is rejected. Now, how is it that that can be the case? How is it that something that can improve a certain metric is rejected as a viable path going forward? That's because the finance division, your company overall, or your division, has a certain hurdle rate, has a certain cost of capital that has to be estimated and has to be satisfied. So for example, if in your company the hurdle rate is 15%, that's the cost of capital, right? That's the cost of the funds that are provided to your company. That any project that you propose, any idea, any innovation that you propose has to offer a return that's above that hurdle rate of 15%. So it's not enough to be able to increase a certain level of productivity. It's not enough to reduce cost. It has to be such that it overcomes that hurdle rate. So this conversation helps us understand one another in a certain way. Just two brief things. The discount rate basically reflects a compensation for risk, okay? Because in the end, if we say that the discount rate is going to be a weighted average of the cost of funding through equity and through debt, why are people asking for 20% compensation as equity holders? Why are they asking 10% compensation as creditors, right? So equity, say in my example, 20%. Debt holders ask for 10%. If you fund yourself equally from both sources, your weighted average cost of capital is 15%. Now, where do these numbers come from? These numbers come from the fact that your providers of funds recognize that they bear risk, and in exchange for bearing that risk, they're asking for that return. So the discount rate reflects a compensation for risk. And of course, because of that, it automatically is the case that it's the costs of your funds, right? If your funders, because of the risk they bear, ask for 20 and 10% respectively, then your cost of capital is 15%. You have to take that money and use it in such a way that the return you earn is going to be 15% on that money, so that you can pay half of your providers of funds the 20% you owe them or you promised them, and the other half the 10% that you offered them. Okay, so a discount rate reflects a compensation for risk, and it's a reflection also, of course, of the cost of the funds used for that project. Now, if it's a compensation for risk, where does risk come from? And these two things are very important because sometimes we don't realize this. We kind of understand this one, right? Risk comes from the presence of debt. A company, if you compare two companies, right? And let's just say that compared to utility companies, one has no debt, the other one has a certain level of debt. which one do you perceive as riskier? Now, the two companies do exactly the same thing. But you generally will say, well, if the two companies do exactly the same thing, but one has debt and the other one does not, the one that has debt, to me, has a higher level of risk. It doesn't mean that it's going to go bankrupt, but there's a certain commitment of payments that one has that the other one does not. So that is our concern, that at some point maybe the volatility of the earnings will be such that that company that has debt and has to make those payments may not be able to comply with it, right? So in overall, the mere presence of debt increases the risk of a company, even though it does not necessarily mean, again, that it would go bankrupt, but it's just riskier than one that has less debt or no debt at all. I hope that makes sense. Now, this is the interesting one. Risk also comes from who you are, what your assets do, and that's called business risk. So think of it this way. Let's forget about debt for now. Let's suppose that you're comparing two companies. One company, say, as we said before, is a utility company. And another company is a technology company. Now, I've just proposed that both of them have, zero debt, right? In both cases. But here's a question. So we don't have to worry about that. But here's a question. Which of the two will you consider as more volatile, as riskier? I don't mean opportunities, right? I mean, or innovation, right? I just mean risk itself. Of the two, the utility company is much more stable because the demand is well known to a certain extent. In most cases, prices are controlled. So of the two, the technology company, because of it's involved in a more dynamic environment, and because there's more volatility, more growth prospects in most cases, the technology company is going to be the riskier one. So as you can see, it's not just the presence of debt, it's also who you are and what you do. So I just want you to keep these things in your mind, because in the next series of conversations, we're going to make use of these two realizations, right? That risk not only comes from the presence of debt, but also risk comes from who you are, what your assets do.